Morning.
Greetings from Denver.
Yes, I'm from Denver also. This is Bill Edwards.
Oh, hello, Bill.
Well, greetings from Austin, Texas.
Good morning, Joel.
How are you?
I'm doing good, thank you.
Joel, that looks like hill country behind you.
That's the view out my office window. Most people think you're in California or something when they say that, but yes, we have a hill country.
Hello, Glenn.
Greetings.
Where are you located?
Silverthorne, Colorado, which is between Keystone and Steamboat.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I used to have a house in Keystone.
Is are the aspen turning yet, or is that in October?
Now we're well into it.
Okay.
That being at 9,000 feet, it comes just a little sooner.
Right. We'll have to make it out there.
Where are you located, Sherif?
I'm just outside of Boulder. Just outside of Boulder. I see Bill is joining us. And I think we're expecting a couple of other attendees based on the message I have.
I'm going to go on mute for a minute.
Okay, well, we're going to get started. So welcome to American CEO webinar number 2. Our guest is Joel Trammell, co-founder and located in Austin, Texas, with a beautiful background of what it actually looks like outside his office. So good morning, Joel. How are you?
Good morning. Good to be with you.
Good to be with you as well. Our topic today is, what is the job of a CEO and how is it different from any other jobs? That's quite of a broad subject, but I know you have some very strong views on that. So how would you like to begin answering that question?
Yeah, I think I'll start by telling a story. So I was interviewing a gentleman who had been COO of Delta Airlines. And as COO of Delta Airlines, he had direct responsibility for 80,000 employees. Were in his chain of command. He had over 2,000 flight operations per day that were his part. Basically his job description was to make sure all those 2,000 flight operations went well every day. And so this COO gets a call about a CEO job, and it's a fairly small 1,500 person software company that he's going to go be CEO of. And he thinks, hey, I've been running 80,000 people. I've been running 2,000 flight operations a day. How difficult can this job be? And he tells the story of, walking in and getting kind of pushed with his first major decision, and suddenly realized there was nobody to go ask for advice. There was nobody to go talk to about the decision, that he didn't have a boss anymore. And it was the first time in his 25-year career that he had not had a boss, at least to bounce off the ideas. And some people say, well, my boss isn't very good, but ultimately, they have the responsibility. And when you take over the CEO job, now suddenly you have the responsibility. And it's really hard to know how you're going to react to that until the first time you are in command. And some people, react very positively to that, but certainly some people struggle with that. And it makes decision-making hard, and they are constantly second-guessing themselves, and they worry about imposter syndrome and various other things. And then the decision-making process itself is different because most people come out of an area of expertise. Let's say you were a sales guy, and so you were a really good salesperson, and then you get promoted to sales manager and then to sales director and then to sales VP. And constantly you're building your expertise in sales. And so when you're the chief executive of the sales group, let's say you're executive vice president of worldwide sales or whatever, you're the leading expert in the company typically on sales, right? And so how you make a decision then is, as an expert, well, you're going to identify the problem. You're going to gather the data. You're going to analyze the data because you understand the data because you're an expert, right? And then you're going to kind of make a pronouncement and say, here, as the expert, I've decided here's what we're going to do. Of course, when you move into the CEO chair, no one's the expert in all the areas of the business. You may be an expert in sales now, you move into the CEO chair, but 9 out of the 10 decisions that come to your desk aren't sales decisions. And so if you try to approach those other decisions in the same way you approach a sales decision, you say, well, I'm going to gather the information, I'm going to define the problem, all those things. I mean, there's not enough time in a day to deal with one of them, because the first one's going to be a legal question and you need 20 years of legal experience to be the expert on the legal question, right? And so it's a change in the nature of the work, right? You're now working in the white spaces of the organization instead of having direct expertise. Another thing that most people don't think about, but the leader of the organization needs to be focused on the future. They need to be, they're the lead dog of the dog sled. They got to decide where we're going. And so they got to spend a lot of their time talking about the future, thinking about the future, anticipating the future. Most executive jobs are very present and past focused. Okay. That sales guy's trying to close a deal today. He's dealing with a customer issue from yesterday. He's very now focused. Good CEOs are very future focused. And so all these things lead it to it's a fundamental change in the nature of work. And I think the only other similar change that some people experience is maybe if you can remember the first time you went from being an individual contributor to a manager. That's another kind of very fundamental change in the nature of the work you're doing. But the CEO is a very dramatic change in that manner. And so a lot of people who've been incredibly successful at every other job they've held in an organization really struggle when they get into the CEO job because they're not realizing this change in the nature of the work.
What comes to mind is how important that CEO position is and how ill prepared, based on just what you just said, most people are who reach that position. Why? Why is there not a better system that already exists in the free enterprise system of the United States of America to prepare CEOs?
Yeah, well, several reasons, I think. One, it's a fairly new position in the grand scheme of things. Organizational size, where you have hundreds, thousands of people working in an organization is a relatively, in the grand scheme of history, a new phenomenon, right? We did not have that other than militaries. And so actually it's interesting, if you look how the military addresses this problem, for any command, they have a commanding officer, and then directly below that commanding officer is an executive officer. And every one of the people below that report through the executive officer to the commanding officer. And of course, obviously in a military, you're worried about what happens if the commanding officer gets killed. And so that's part of the reason that structure's in place. But it's also in place to train the future commanding officers, because the executive officer is seeing every bit of information, every decision that commanding officer is making. In modern American business, I mean, I hear people talk about the C-suite, like all the executives are sitting in one room gathered in a bullpen making decisions. And as we all know, that's not how it happens, right? If you're running a major organization, you may only see some of your executives once a week, once every other week. They're not in the flow of the exact same data you're seeing as CEO. And so they don't get the view of what the job is. So yeah, that's one of the things I've said, the military kind of figured this out because they had to deal with it for a lot longer, that, hey, you kind of need an executive officer, somebody that's seeing everything in place. And then, from a training perspective, we created the MBA programs, and a lot of the universities have been very successful for years with their MBA programs, but those MBA programs weren't generally started or taught by people who had ever been in the CEO role. So those MBA programs remain very functional in nature, right? They teach you how to do financial analysis or be particularly good at one of the functional areas of the business. They don't understand the leadership position and responsibility across the organization. So yeah, it's interesting for such an important role that provides so much value. There's really not been a lot even written about it. When I wrote my book in 2014 and said, hey, I'm going to provide a system to be CEO, I thought I would find that Harvard had a system, Yale had a system, MIT had a system, Stanford had a system, and I would come in as the practitioner and basically say, okay, you guys are a bunch of academics, you don't really understand. Instead, what I found is none of them had even thought about the problem. I mean, yeah, they write a lot about broad management and leadership concepts, but the unique role of being in charge of a organization, of hundreds or thousands of people in the modern US economy is not something that most academics have considered because they just have no experience with it.
Very interesting. So in talking about the CEO job, if you had to put it in a nutshell, how would you describe what is a CEO job?
Yeah, so I mean, the ultimate, what everybody's kind of expecting from you, right? The stakeholders, typically the board, if you have a board, the owners, if you have owners, your spouse, if you own the business, what your employees are expecting from you, what your customers are expecting from you is what I boil down to two words: predictable performance. Now, there's a lot in those two words to unpack, but the idea first, predictable as opposed to just performance, right? In sports, often it's just about wins, right? At the end of the game, you know whether you won or not. And so the object's to win the game. In business, unfortunately, you need to have a little better information. You need to know not only are you going to win, but how much are you going to win by? Because that dramatically impacts resource allocation. And so, yes, I would prefer in my business to have an upside surprise and deliver performance that was better than I expected. I would rather that than a downside surprise. It's still a problem if you have an upside surprise, because that means you're probably not going to take advantage of the opportunity. You're not going to as aggressively deploy the resources as you probably should have if you had known that you were going to have that upside surprise, right? And so this concept of not only winning and being successful and growing the business, yes, all those things are important, but also building systematically a way to predict that growth and performance is, if you want to optimize the outcome for the stakeholders, that's what you need to really be focused on.
And so when it comes to spending your time as a CEO in order to create predictable performance, I know that one of your pet peeves is when a CEO, for example, hits a single or a double instead, where it could have been a home run. Sometimes striking out happens as well.
Sure.
Where should a CEO be spending their time in terms of their responsibilities?
Yeah, so let me answer the question in two ways. Let me answer first where they probably shouldn't be spending their time, where they often are. And so often what happens is, especially if they were with the organization when the organization was smaller, when the organization's 10 or 20 or 30 employees, often the CEO is not just the CEO, but they're also the chief executive of the various functional areas. So they're really the EVP of sales, they're the EVP of marketing, they're the CFO, they're the CIO, they're the chief human resources, they're everything, okay? Now, if you do it right, what should happen as you go from 20 employees, 25 employees, somewhere in there, to 100 employees, is you should systematically and thoughtfully hand off each of those other executive roles to somebody who's better qualified, who really is an expert in sales or marketing or finance or whatever, such that when you get to 100, 125 employees, somewhere in there, typically you need a full management team that has executives that are making all the key decisions that are related to those functional areas and really running their functional area of the business. And so then at that point, the CEO should be able to focus their time first on the future. What is the vision for the organization? What's the strategy? But I like the word vision better because I think in some ways it's broader and it focuses you really on the future. Strategy is certainly a part of that, but you've got to be communicating that vision, making sure that's the correct vision and communicating it to everybody in the organization so that they can act on it. You've got to be thinking about how do you allocate the resources? How do you get the right people on your team? Do you have the right capital you need to be successful? You need to be thinking about the culture. Am I building a positive, effective culture? How can I improve the culture? How can I make employees more engaged in the organization? As the organization grows, you got to teach and hand off decision-making authority. So making decisions is critically important, but teaching the organization to make decisions. Too many CEOs, at 20, you're making every decision, again, because you are not only the CEO, but you're the executive of all those areas. So you should be making all the decisions. But at 100, at 500, at 1,000, if you're still making a lot of those decisions, you're limiting your ability of your organization to scale. And then, obviously at the end of the day, the CEO is responsible for this predictable performance, but you've got to do those things, the vision, the resource allocation, the culture and decision-making process to deliver consistent, predictable performance.
So I heard you just go over the 5 responsibilities that are in your book, which makes perfect sense. The one thing that has come up for me in conversations is every business is so different, and every one of the things the CEO gets paid a lot of money for is to figure things out, and you're talking about a system for actually teaching the CEO job. Could you speak to how that applies across industries and across different challenges?
Yeah, so you say every business is different, depends on what business you think you're in. And so fundamentally, what I tell people is if you're in a knowledge business, okay, now if you're digging ditches with pickaxes and shovels, that's a different business. But for most of us that are in knowledge related businesses, the real business we're in, the only way, in my opinion, to build sustainable long-term growth is to master the ability to attract and make productive, talented individuals. Okay, because your business is people if you're in a knowledge business, right? And so, a lot of people think, oh, I can grow my business by just selling more. Well, yeah, for 1 quarter or 2 quarters, but then you got to deliver, and then you got to provide customer service, and then you got to account for that, and then you got, and so it's a never-ending game. And so I think the fundamental thing that most CEOs don't think about is that as you grow your business, you're fundamentally in the people acquisition and make productive business. That's the underlying business, and that you can have a system for. Yes, in your particular business, you're going to have intellectual challenges, technology challenges, geographic challenges, those things. Yes, you may not be able to build a system for those things, but the CEO doesn't have to solve all those problems. The CEO can hire really great people, and if you've got really good people working for you, those people are the ones that are responsible. If you've got a really good chief technology officer, they're the ones that are supposed to spend all day, every day thinking about how to solve that technology challenge. That's not the CEO's role and responsibility when you get to scale. And so I think every growing knowledge business is basically in the people business, and that you can talk about from a systematic perspective because people are people. And if your business grows to any real size, you're going to have to deal with all the variations of those people. Okay. You don't get just the people that are just like you, or just you can't hire just engineers. I've looked at businesses, that first 30 employees, 27 are engineers. Okay. That may work until you get the product to market, but then you got to hire some other people. And as you get to scale, you're going to have people across the whole spectrum. And so you need to have a systematic way to run an organization. And I think you can talk about a system for that.
That's wonderful, because saying that the real business you're in is the people business. And so the primary challenge is to attract the best people and make them productive, which is a whole entire subject. But since you brought it up, what are some highlights of attracting and making good people productive?
Yeah, well, there's a quote from Richard Fairbank that I love, that he says, in most organizations, people spend 2% of their time recruiting and 75% of their time managing their recruiting mistakes. And that's because, again, they're not looking at their business as a people business. And so, first, once you kind of change the lens and say, that's my business, well, then recruiting, which is to me a continuous process of searching for the best people, becomes key. And, we see this like in sports, right? In the NFL, a head coach gets a lot of press, but the general manager is really important, right? And what's his job? His job is to scour the world and find anybody that he can attract to his football team that's better than the 42 guys they're putting out on the field this Sunday, right? And anytime he can find one of those people, he, slots them in, right? Makes the move. And so that's the way the CEO, in my opinion, should think about their job is to build a recruiting process that allows for the discovery of these people, that provides an environment that attracts these people, and then provides an environment that retains and makes productive these people so that they want to stay in your organization. Nothing worse than hiring a great A player and then they spend 3 months and they go, no, this isn't for me. I mean, I heard this story just yesterday in my office. A woman walked in that was hired as a chief marketing officer for an organization, and the CEO was basically crazy, and she had some bad experiences, not direct. I mean, she saw the CEO get lose his temper with a couple other execs, and it just wasn't a very healthy environment. So 3 months in, they run one of these pulse surveys where they ask you, how's your job, and would you recommend your job to somebody else to work in this organization? And sure, she replied low scores on those too. And instead of somebody saying, oh, okay, what did we do wrong? What should we change? She got a call from the head of HR who said, you understand the CEO is going to see these scores. Don't you want to change your numbers? And so, that's a case of the CEO just doesn't understand what business they're in.
That's amazing to me. Okay. Since you brought up the sports analogy, Denver, that we have a new GM, George Payton.
Right.
We have a coach who's trying to stay in, but I've heard you relate what we do with American CEO. You relate it to, the difference between a head coach and a quarterback's coach.
Yeah.
As far as what the CEO needs. Could you tell us what you mean by that?
Yeah, so a lot of people think when you say coach, most of our experience for most of us with a coach was when we were small, and it was really somebody training us for a specific sport, right? We played Little League baseball, whatever, and what did the coach do? The coach tried to teach us how to hit the ball, how to throw the ball, and those very early fundamentals, right? And so when we say coach, a lot of us have in our mind, well, a coach is someone who knows more about how to do the job that I'm doing than I do, and they're going to train me how to do it. Okay, but that is not what a coach is in the sophisticated profession like the NFL, right? Bill Belichick is the head coach of the New England Patriots, arguably the best head coach in the history of the National Football League. And what position did Bill Belichick play in the NFL? Well, it's a trick question because Bill Belichick didn't play in the NFL. Okay, so he is not training his players on their specific positions, how to execute those specific positions. No, he's in a coaching relationship, which is different. A coaching relationship, what you're doing in a coaching relationship is providing accountability. And I use the word accountability, and most people, that doesn't resonate with them because they think when you say accountability, that just means you need to fire somebody, because that's how it's used kind of commonly in the press and stuff. When people start claiming we need accountability for this, they just want to fire somebody. So instead, I tell people to replace the words accountability with providing objective reality. That's really what the coach does, right? Because all of us need somebody to provide objective reality, because our natural tendency is to say, we didn't make a mistake. It wasn't our fault. It was somebody else's, right? So, classic example in football, the quarterback throws the ball 10 yards over the receiver's head. But of course he says, oh, the receiver ran the wrong route, or that lineman didn't block the guy, and so he was in my face, or whatever. And the head coach, Belichick, you can imagine Brady coming over the sideline and saying, oh, he ran the wrong route. And Belichick's job is to say objective reality. No, he didn't run the wrong route. You threw a bad pass, Tom. And so that is what coaching is all about, is providing objective reality. to people, and every CEO can do that. I mean, I've spent 30 years being CEO. I've never known more about doing the executive job of any of those. I would be a terrible VP of marketing, VP of sales. I've never known more than the people I manage. Doesn't mean I can't be in a coaching relationship with those people. Now, sometimes in that coaching relationship, you find out that Tom Brady's struggling with his throwing motion. And you say, okay, then as the head coach, I'm going to bring in somebody who's an expert on how to throw a football, and they're going to work with Tom Brady. And that's great. And sometimes you'll find really in your coaching of your executives, you're going to say, yeah, you got a weakness there, but I don't know how to solve the problem. But I'm responsible as your boss, basically, to go find somebody that can provide that technical training or insight that you need. But that's training versus coaching.
That's a great perspective. Thank you, Joel. This brings us to the official end time of the interview section. If anybody has a question, we have a couple minutes where you can pick Joel's brain. If you don't, that's okay too. But let me open it up to see if there are any questions.
Hey, Joel, can you speak a little bit to, I'm not a big, obviously I come from the baby boom side of this. And now that I realize that certainly 80% of the people will either be Gen Z or millennials that I'm managing. And the notion is that, trying to push people 60 hours a week and doing things the way we had done to become successful, at this level is different than what it takes to manage people. And people are people, I get it, but can you speak a little bit to the way in which you have seen CEOs have to transform, one, that their expectations may not be considered reasonable going forward, and two, the way in which you see really successful companies taking on that challenge?
So the way I look at the generational challenge, and there's a great guy here in Austin that gives a great speech on this, but the way I kind of look at the generational challenge is people don't change. People are people. We evolve, but very slowly. So, I grew up with parents that lived through the Great Depression. And so they weren't different, but people have different experiences, and their experiences set their expectations. And so that's what you need to understand is if they've had a different set of experiences, their expectations are going to be different. So my mom kept to her dying day 5 different bank accounts open because she wasn't going to have more than $100,000 in any one bank, because she had seen what happened during the Depression, and banks failed. Right now, to me, I had never seen banks fail, and I was not worried about my account that needed to be paid off by the federal government, but that was an expectation, right? So if you get to the more modern generations, you say, when did they really see a big downturn? Well, if they're in their 20s, they didn't really deal with 9/11 and the impacts of that. They haven't really seen that big downturn. If they weren't in the financial area, they didn't see 2007, 2008, if their parents weren't involved. And so basically they've seen kind of growing standards of living, plenty of jobs available. And so how do they think about a job is just very different than people who grew up in the 70s when we had, stagflation and various issues. Getting a job was I got this job. It's a valuable thing. Now, somebody coming out of college goes, I can go down to McDonald's and get a $18 an hour job. And so it's not as valuable. So am I going to work 60 hours a week to keep that job? No, I'm going to work 40 hours a week. And if they don't like it, I'm going to go find a job down the street. Also, a couple other factors that impact this is people are getting married later. So they have no responsibility at 25. If you're married and have 2 kids at 25, you don't want to lose that job. If you're single at 25, you may decide you want to move to Colorado so you can go skiing every weekend. And so what's perceived as, not taking their career seriously is often just their current situation allows them to be in that position, where many of us were married and already had responsibilities at that age. So you absolutely have to take that into consideration. But people don't change. And if you hire the right people that are maniacally focused on being great at what they do and buy into the mission of your organization, they'll work 50, 60 hours. Now, they may do it from Seattle. They may do it from somewhere else. They may want the flexibility to take off at more less scheduled times. They may want some flexibility. But it's a matter of finding the people who are committed and excited about your mission going forward, and those people will be engaged. But if you're not clear about what your mission is, and yeah, you're just hiring people off the streets, you got to understand they have a lot of opportunity right now. They can go get a job. I mean, if you want a job in this country right now, at least as far as Austin, Texas is concerned, you can go anywhere you want, next business down the street, and get another job.
It's a great answer. Were you going to say something else, Joe?
No, I was going to ask, did that kind of address your question?
Glenn, you're muted. Okay, here you go.
It did. I mean, I grew up in the culture where in the Silicon Valley, and if you worked for 10 years, you could go on a sabbatical. You know, you could take
Right.
8 months off for a sabbatical, and I'm trying not to sound like the bitter old guy, but it's like, I've been here for the whole damn year. Why wouldn't I get a 2 month sabbatical? I mean,
Yes.
maybe,
Well, it's even, I've got kids, and so I see it. When I was a kid, I wanted a bunch of things. Okay. I wanted my dad to buy me a car when I was 16. My kids live in the lap of luxury. All they really care about is their cell phone working. They got internet connectivity. I had to almost twist the arm of my daughter to convince her to learn how to drive, which just blew my mind, right? We were begging our parents, can we drive? Can we drive? Can we get a car? Can we save enough money to, but, and my kids, those kind of tangible things, we've become so rich as a society largely that those tangible things are just much less important to them. And that has an impact on the job as well,
Thank
it's
you.
a struggle when you look at somebody's resume and you see the ability to take off or see that they have had the innovative attitude of creating all these travel adventures that they've put together, and you say that's the kind of person that can get into trouble somewhere and find an answer. This is a person who can plan such an interesting and exotic trip. And this is the kind of person who's going to want to only work 10 months a year. I'm like, it's like, you fool, you hired into this. Why can't you see this? You are a part of it, So sometimes I question my own wisdom in that regard.
I understand.
Hey, Joel.
Yep.
This is Richard. My camera's not working this morning. I apologize for that, but hey, I want to ask you a question. I think that it really resonated what you're saying about being a master of attraction and retention, that when I've been at anything long enough, I realize that is the problem and I don't discover it nearly quick enough, I'm sure. So what kind of tips do you have for leaders to overcome initial change barriers, like their own leadership blind spots, let's say, as well as getting a handful of people on board to celebrate what it is you're trying to do? Is there some kind of ideas about pattern interrupt or something to start to get people beginning to look at it with the objective reality you mentioned?
Yeah, well, I tell people you don't really have a team until we've all agreed upon the mission. And a lot of people think you have a team just because I hired 10 people. Now, that doesn't make a team, right? I mean, first thing any good coach does is try to create a team. So, if I was there in Colorado and I say, hey, let's go climb a mountain, who's in? Some people are kind of in, but until I tell you what mountain, you don't even know, how to prepare or what exactly to do. So it's so important. And the older I get, the more important it seems to get people who identify with your mission. First of all, you got to be really clear what your mission is. Okay. Why are you getting up every morning to lead this organization? What is it you're trying to accomplish? Why does that excite you? And then working on your ability to tell that story and making sure that the people that you attract are attracted to that story. And you know, Southwest Airlines, a great example, right? When they hire flight attendants, they prioritize people who are fun, entertaining, customer service centric. Delta Airlines prioritizes people who are rule followers, who will get you there as safely as possible. Neither one is right or wrong. They're different. They value different things. But what Southwest has made Southwest so successful is they are upfront and clear about what they value. And that attracts people who belong to their tribe, if you will. And so it's much easier to form a team. And so that's, you know, where CEOs often lose it. They hire a bunch of people and they say, why isn't everybody on the team? Why aren't they getting together? Why aren't we sharing information? Why aren't we working together? Is because they're not really part of a team yet. You haven't built a team until everybody said, yeah, that's where I want to go.
Oh, that's awesome. Thanks. I'm sure you guys have an agenda here that you want to wrap up, but that's a great answer. Thanks for that.
Yeah, that's responsibility number one, is the vision, right? So
Yeah.
I do want to be respectful to everyone's time. Joel, I appreciate every time we have a conversation, I learn something new. So I appreciate your wisdom, and I look forward to talking to you at our next webinar, which is in 2 weeks. So
Sounds great.
you guys have a great day.
Thanks, guys.